Kristie Daniel is the Program Director of the Livable Cities program for the HealthBridge Foundation of Canada. She provides technical support and advice to partners in low and middle income countries to help them advocate for access for the most vulnerable to healthy transportation, healthy foods, and parks and public open spaces. Her inspiration for placemaking is rooted in her public health background. To be healthy, people need places that make the healthy choices the easiest choice. For her, placemaking is a great way to create spaces and places where people can be their best selves. In this episode, we talked about her passion and lessons around public health, communities, and public spaces.
Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm Asban Sari, the founder of the organization Peacemakers Pakistani, and I'm bringing you the stories of placemakers, artists, and professionals from around the globe about how they created an impact and made change happen. You are listening to the Making It Happen show. Thank you for joining in. Enjoy the episode. Hello, Kristie. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you and how it's going?
I'm great. It is a bit of a cloudy day here in Canada, but the weather is starting to warm up, so I'm very well. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so happy to have you here, and our chat, basically online chat, has been so heartwarming from your side. You're so welcoming. You were so welcoming. So I was looking forward to our conversation today. And also, where do you live in Canada? In which city you are?
So I actually live in a smaller village that is north of Toronto by about 150 kilometers. So Toronto would be the major city that I am close by.
Right. Villages are fun, I think. More
Mhm.
more intimate and close to people. Good. Okay, so let's start with the questions and see how it goes. Okay, I want to know that how did you find your passion for public spaces and placemaking?
So my passion came through health. So I am a public health person. I worked in a public health department for 11 years before I joined HealthBridge. I have a master's in public health. So I look at how our cities are designed and built based on a public health lens. And so when I first started working on this in this area, I was a senior policy analyst on health in the built environment. And a lot of my focus was on creating walkable communities and on looking at how transportation systems work and how can we encourage more people to walk and cycle. And so it was from that foundation, if you will, that I became involved in really advocating for public spaces more broadly. So looking at the transportation network, it's the streets. So our streets are our public spaces. But then we also need the destinations to go to within our communities. So parks, playgrounds, plazas, that was becoming a really important destination within that walkable community. And of course, local public markets is an area that we work in quite extensively as I would say the third pillar of public spaces. And so those are the places where people can walk or cycle to access healthy, fresh food. I don't tend to work in the placemaking sphere as much as in the public space sphere. So it's really my focus tends to be more on supporting the local partners, especially around policy and advocacy. But especially when it comes to streets, we so often treat streets as if they are only places to get from one place to another, as opposed to places in and of themselves. And so a lot of our partners in HealthBridge have been working for a number of years on car-free streets, car-free street events, cycle day events where the streets are closed down and turned into public spaces. And that's such a great use of the streets. It's such a great use of that public space is to turn them over to people and not just have them places for cars to move around. So this was a long answer to that question, but my route to public spaces is really through public health, because if we don't have public spaces within our communities, it's very hard to have healthy populations. It's very hard to have healthy cities. And so that's where my main passion comes from.
And I'm so happy that I met you and I got the opportunity to learn from you because my personal
connection to public spaces or the discovery of serving, like my passion towards serving for this area and advocating for public spaces and through placemaking has also come from um, my determination towards public health and my own health. Especially,
Right.
I started from my own mental health journey and my own physical health, emotional, and it all came after that. And then
Yeah.
I discovered that public spaces had a very significant role in this. So this is how I landed over here. I graduated as an architect, but then I realized that public spaces in on and the urban area or the house or the spaces outside our homes, they play a very important role in our health.
Yeah.
So this is, this has been my route as well, and I want to learn more from people in public health that are contributing to this thing. So thank you so much for being here, for accepting my invitation. Okay, I want to know that you have been with the HealthBridge Foundation, and it has been a long commitment. So, you told me that you are dedicated to the public health, and definitely HealthBridge would help you do it. So, what has been done under this foundation so far, and what else we can look forward to, and we can contribute to?
So, HealthBridge has a fairly extensive program, mostly in Asia and Africa. We have done some programming under the Livable Cities program in South America, but for the most part, we're in Asia and Africa. And so HealthBridge works with local organizations in the cities where we're working. So HealthBridge doesn't set up an office in all of the places that we're working. We actually think it's much better to work with a local group who understands the local context, who speaks the local language, who understands how to go about doing advocacy within their own community. And so we work with those organizations, and so my role is to provide them with technical support and advice on how to go about basically advocating for healthy policy related to public spaces in their communities. We have seen, I couldn't possibly, I would take probably many hours if I went through all of the wonderful work that our partners do on the ground. We have, if people are interested, they can go to the HealthBridge website. We have a number of program summary reports as well as project summary reports. The project summary reports for me are the most interesting. So the program summary reports talk about what's happened within a given year, but the project summary reports talk about what's happened to a project over many, many years. And so one of the nice things about, I think, the HealthBridge program is so we have received funding from an anonymous donor in order to work on this particular program. And that donor has really recognized the importance of a long-term commitment to investing in the local organizations. So often funders have like a 1, 2, maybe 5-year commitment, and then they pull their funding out. And the problem is when it comes to public policy, it can take many, many years. It can take up to 10 years to actually see a difference. And so if you pull out after 5 years, then you don't actually get to see what the longer term results of that particular project are. And so I'll give you two examples in Asia, since you are in Asia, of some longer term projects and what the partners have been able to achieve as a result of working. So I'm going to start with our local organization in India called ASAF. They have a Livable Cities program, I believe in 10 I think it's 10 cities right now, might be 11. My apologies. I don't always have exactly the number on the top of my head, but they have a project in a number of cities within India. The focus is predominantly on secondary cities. So those are cities where a lot of other big NGOs aren't interested in. Everybody wants to work in Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata. Nobody's working in the Nagpurs, the Trishurs, the Balapurams. And so they have been working in ASAF on an accessible beach program. And so what they did was, I think it was in 2015, they did a study on the beaches in Kerala. So Kerala is the southernmost state in India. They have lots of coastline. And so they did a study on the public space. They did a public space study, but it was focused specifically on the beaches. And what they were looking for was how well were the beaches used? Are they accessible for people living with disabilities? What are the quality of those spaces, those types of things? And what they found was the beaches were the least used public space in the community, and there was no facilities for people living with disabilities, which means that those people are going to be excluded from that really important resource in that community. So we received a small grant from UN Habitat. It was actually the ASAF portion was one project out of an 8-project grant. And so for something like $10,000, it was not very much. They redid a beach in Kochi. And the focus on that was to create a facility for people living with disabilities to be able to access the beach. So they created a ramp, they created accessible washrooms, they did a few other things. And so they created this accessible beach. And it was a success. People were really excited about it. What ASAF has done, though, with that project, so that was just one project funded by UN Habitat for 1 year, right? That was the typical model but because HealthBridge invests through our anonymous donor, we invest in ASAF on a yearly basis. They were able to take that one small project and continue the advocacy related to ensuring that public spaces in Kerala are accessible. And so what we have now is 38 beaches in the state of Kerala that have facilities for people living with disabilities. And I think they were able to leverage a 1.5 million USD contribution from the government to create those spaces. So it wasn't like ASAF used their budget to create the accessible spaces. They were able to advocate and convince the government that this is something that was really important. So that was the value of the pilot project, was to show the government this is needed and it's not that hard to do it. You just have to make a commitment and a financial and set aside budget for it. So to me, that was an example of a tremendous success that worked over years, right? So it started in 2015. I think 2017 or 2018 was when we had the pilot project from UN Habitat. They worked on a guideline document. They continued to have meetings with government, so that now we have this 38 beaches. So I think that's an example of an amazing success. Another example of something along those same lines where we've worked on a project over a 10-year period is a project in a city called Hoi An in Vietnam. So this is a smaller scale city. It's a UNESCO heritage site. And this was a public spaces program more broadly. And so our local group, and in Vietnam, it's our only other office in the world. So we have an office in Ottawa and we have an office in Hanoi. It's a historical office. It's been there since the 1980s. So it is the one sort of instance where we actually do have an office, and it is HealthBridge staff that work on it. So with that project, in 2015, we did a study of the public spaces in Hoi An. It was a case study where we took a sample of 12 public spaces in Hoi An. We did an assessment of them. We talked to people to find out what they liked about the spaces, what they didn't. And then we presented that information to the government. And what we found was that the government actually was interested and had a commitment to public spaces, but they didn't really know how to go about it. They didn't really know how to involve the community in helping to shape those public spaces. So what they would do would be things like it's extremely hot there. It's close to the equator. It's a tropical city. They would put a bench somewhere, and there would be no shade anywhere for that bench. And so who's going to sit in that bench basically 90% of the time, because it's just too hot to sit with the sun beating down on you. So they had that investment and that commitment, but they just didn't know exactly what to do. So we presented the results of our findings to the government, and we recommended that they develop a parks master plan, and that they form a city team in order to do that. And I don't know exactly how or why it worked out this way, but they were extremely interested and they formed the city team within a week of that recommendation and that dissemination seminar. That doesn't usually happen. We don't usually have such immediate success, but I guess the results were presented in such a compelling way that they thought, okay, yes, this is something that we need to tackle. And so over the course, I think that was in 2012. So over the course of the next 3 years, the city developed their public space master plan. Included in that, there were pilot projects where we demonstrated to the government how they could go about engaging the community in developing their public spaces, how they could get funding from the local community in some places. But they also then did things like I think they consulted with 600 citizens and residents groups. So all of this community engagement went into the development of the public spaces master plan. So that plan was from 2015 until 2020. And what they wanted to do was add 78 new public spaces to their city. That's a huge number of public spaces, and that is an incredibly aggressive target to achieve over 5 years. So when they came up with that target, I was like, okay, there's no way that they can do that. And in all fairness, they couldn't. Like that is a lot, right? That's a lot to create 78 new public spaces. But they created a lot. I think it was over 50 over the course. So in 2020, we were supposed to do the evaluation. Of course, you know what happened in 2020, the world fell apart. So we started with the evaluation, I think in 2021. And what we were able to show is that we increased the number of people using the public spaces. They increased the number of public spaces by 42% in the city, which is a huge amount of new public spaces for people to use. What were some of the other findings? They increased the area. So you know how there's that number floating around out in the world that the WHO has said that every person should have 9 square meters of public space. I will say that I've spoken to WHO people and nobody knows where that's come from. And so they don't think that it was them that said it, but it's attributed to them. And so what ended up happening, I think, and these numbers might be off by like a little bit, but not much. The city of Hoi An went from 2.7 square meters of public space per person to 5 square meters of public space per person. So they haven't achieved 9 yet, but they are well on their way. And so that is another example of long-term commitment and what happens when you can actually follow a program and project all the way through. So again, you asked me one question and I just talk forever. So I will let you ask another question.
It's inspiring and the work you guys are doing, and the best thing is that you're supporting people who are actually trying to run programs in their own cities and in their own context. That's the best thing, and it's so inspiring to know that a place where beaches were not being used in the right manner, and then there are 38 beaches now that are being used to full potential for the well-being of people, basically. So that's great, and I'll look more into details on the website of HealthBridge to learn more from it. Definitely, thank you.
Great.
And the way you were sharing it, it was like I was applauding it along the way, because it's really inspiring and moving that yes, it's doable. And like it's very doable. Okay, you mentioned about the livable cities, and what I wanted to ask you is that how do you address your concern about the public health in densely populated areas, and where there are limited resources and also the lack of civil responsibility? People are not taking ownership and responsibility of their own health and their public spaces. So how do you convince them, or you raise the concern for it?
Well, I'm going to flip that question a little bit around. So I'll address the limited resources a little bit. I'll start with that one. Sorry. So I actually am of the opinion that we actually have lots of resources. We just don't use them effectively, and we don't use them on things that actually make people's lives better. So if you look at any city government budget, and you look at what they are spending to build highways, to build roads, to tear down houses, to widen roads, to make them inhospitable to people. If you look at those budgets alone, you will see hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that are going into that could be used to invest in communities, to invest in the health of the community, to create walkable communities. You could have, for one highway project, the nicest sidewalks and bicycle lanes in a city for the same cost. So I would challenge to say we don't have a lack of resources. We just have a lack of spending on things that are actually priority, or that should be a priority for the people. And so then the part of the question related to getting people to take ownership, I have two somewhat competing opinions on that. On the one hand, one way to do it, and one way that we were very successful in Hoi An and have been successful in lots of other places, is by involving people in the decision-making within their own communities. So if you want people to use parks, then we have to involve them and talk to them about what is it that's going to make a park good for them. And it's not necessarily the specific items within the park. Like kids will maybe say slides or whatever. It's more, what are they going to do within that space? And so, and part of the reason why you don't necessarily want to say, well, what do you want to do in this space? But you want to get a sense of what are the types of things you like to do in general, is because if you've never seen a good park, then you don't necessarily know what to ask for in that discussion. And I'm going to use an example that came from Niger. So Niger is in Western Africa. And Niamey is the capital city. I think it's got something like 2 million people. They only had 5 public spaces in the entire city. And so when we asked people, what do you like to do in those public spaces? The number one answer was that they liked to eat chicken. And the reason why that was the number one answer is because there's a chicken stand in every single one of those public spaces. So if the only thing that you know to do in a public space is eat chicken, then how are you going to ask for anything else? Right? And so then it's our responsibility as civil society, as governments, to show people what's possible. That's why pilot projects are really great, because it gives people an opportunity to experience the change that you're hoping that they will, that they'll want. It's about giving people ideas. So what we did in Niger was we actually pulled some ideas from our local partner in Ghana named Mafra Foundation. They do some really innovative, creative work around public spaces and creating spaces that people actually use. And so we've showed them some examples related to that. So I think if you involve people, then they do actually care about what it is that's going on within their own community. But I also want to push back a little bit, and this is a narrative that I hear all the time, that citizens should be maintaining their public spaces. That's actually a government responsibility. And I don't think it is fair to ask the people, for example, in an informal settlement, who maybe are working 12 hours a day to feed their families, who are struggling to make ends meet, that in addition to all of the activities that they need to do in order to maintain their family, they should also then go and pick up garbage within their public space. I see that as a government role and a government responsibility. I live in Canada. We do have park cleanup days, but those are days. It is the expectation that I have that my government will pick up the garbage at my local public space here, and they do. And so I think that it is not helpful to suggest to citizens, especially those who are living in poverty, that it is their responsibility to maintain spaces when really that's a government job. So I know I answered that 2 different ways, but I feel we can still involve people while not letting government abdicate their responsibility.
Yes, and this makes a lot of sense because it's more realistic, rather than just being, just putting everything on the citizens.
Yeah.
That's very true, and I don't often get to hear this, so I'm a bit surprised as well as convinced. That,
Great.
yeah.
But that's also where, when you bring people on board, when you have citizens who are interested and engaged, they can then advocate to their government to say, that $1 billion highway, we would rather you spend some of that money on maintaining our park. So by providing the strength of citizen input, you can actually change policy related to that. So there is lots of great value in terms of doing community engagement. I just want us to be cautious and recognize that people are busy. Like, imagine if you work all day and then you have to spend 5 hours of your night every night trying to maintain something. It's just too much to ask people. So we can work with community in order to give them a voice and support them, but we shouldn't let government abdicate. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, so like you mentioned that in the cities that people are trying to live life after working and making money, Uh, like the communities that are suffering, that are developing, and they need to make money to live their lifestyle, their lives, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. But in the same thing, we are seeing that due to capitalism and the consumerism culture, there's everything is promoting the sedentary lifestyle. In the past, we used to have the physical activity and active lifestyle, but now we are living off the sedentary lifestyle. So, how do you encourage people to understand the importance of physical activity in terms of health, and not just depending on, this is something which is actually the responsibility of a human being to look after their health and making changes for themselves in this regard. It's not government responsibility to inspire change in you. You see, this portion, how do you tackle that with the community?
So it's government responsibility to make sure that it is possible. And so I'm going to now give you a public health answer to your question. There's something called the social ecological model of health. And what that says is that there are many factors that contribute to whether or not you will engage in a healthy behavior. And so I'm going to use physical activity as my example, if that's okay. So physical activity is a healthy behavior. We want people being active. We want people walking more, cycling more, just moving their bodies more. It's good for, reducing NCDs. It's good for mental health. There's a whole host of reasons why physical activity as a behavior is really important. So there are 4 factors that contribute to whether or not you will engage in physical activity. So the first are the individual factors, and these are the factors that I think you're thinking about. So individual factors are things like your knowledge, your perception, and your attitude towards physical activity. So do you know that physical activity is important for you? Do you know how to do it? Do you feel good about it when you do it, or do you feel bad about it? Okay, so those are the individual factors related to physical activity. The next are the social factors related to physical activity. So these are the influences of your peers and your family. If your mom walks, you are more likely to walk. If your friends walk, you are more likely to walk. If your friends are playing video games all day, you are more likely to play video games all day. So, and this works for anything. Like, think about healthy eating. Whoever it is that cooks the food in your house is the one that influences whether or not you eat healthy food or not. And so there's those social factors that contribute to whether or not you are active or not. Then there's physical environment factors, and this is the area that I'm the expert in because I'm a Livable Cities person. So the physical environment factors determine whether or not it is even possible for you to engage in the behavior. So it's all well and good for us to tell people to go for a walk. But if we tell people to go for a walk and they do, and there's no safe footpaths or sidewalks for them to walk on, or if they cross the road and a car tries to run them over, because that happens in Asia all the time, or they get assaulted as they're walking along, or there's no lighting so that they can't do it easily and safely. So if the physical environment factors don't support that choice, then it's very hard for people to actually do it. So think about children playing. If there's no parks within easy walking distance of where children are, where are they supposed to play? Right? There's no physical environment that actually supports them to make that choice. And the problem is, if we tell people to be physically active before the physical environment supports it, and they have a bad experience, it's almost impossible to get them to do it again. So if I tell you, just go for a walk. Like, come on here, just go for a walk. And you go for a walk and you almost get hit by a car. You're going to say that Kristie's crazy. I'm not walking. That's terrible. I'm going to die. And it's going to be hard for me, even if we fix the physical environment, it's going to be hard for me to convince you that you should go for that walk in the future. And then the final area is what's called societal factors. And so societal factors are things like social norms. They're things like trade policy. They're things like taxation, these larger issues that then impact all of the others. So I'm going to use Pakistan, and I'm going to make an assumption, and you can tell me after if I'm wrong. But it could be that in Pakistan, women are discouraged from bicycling, that it's not considered ladylike, or it's not something that women are encouraged to do within Pakistan. I know that happens in India, that's been happening in Bangladesh, so Pakistan might be the same. So that's a social norm. So we can tell women to bicycle, but if mom thinks that like as a social norm that that's a terrible thing for her daughter to do, then that's going to prevent them from doing that. We also know that there are lots of corporations that make lots of money on supporting car infrastructure, right? So there's a reason why we have more roads and lots of cars on the road, because people are making money off of selling cars. If they were making a lot of money selling bicycles, you would absolutely bet that we would have tons of bicycle infrastructure. And so those are the societal factors that influence whether or not we choose a healthier behavior. And so it's not just as simple as telling somebody to go out and go for a walk. We have to make sure that the physical environment supports them. We have to make sure the cultural environment supports them. We have to make sure that their social group can support that choice before we would then go forward and tell people, let's like go for a walk. So that was another long answer, and that was a little bit of health theory there, but the social ecological model is really important when we're trying to change behavior, and it works for a lot of different issues. It works for healthy eating, it works for a lot of environmental changes. And so it's a good one to think about when we're thinking about, okay, how do we get somebody to do this? We need to make sure that there are lots of pieces in place before we can actually just tell people to go out and do it.
Yes, and the question has two parts. One was the question that I had to ask you, and the other one was why I was asking it. And the funny part is that it was my own journey that I realized that I have some health issues because of the unhealthy lifestyle and also the lack of opportunities of going outside, outdoor activities. And it was due to the restriction of the movement and the unsafe environment, because of the major cause was the major reason was the unsafe environment. And this was my inspiration, or my reason behind that I came towards advocating for the public spaces, for my own health and for my family's health, and then overall, the people as well. So I can relate to all the points that you mentioned, that it does have to be a motivation from your inside that yes, I want to go out, and then peers and our family help in going out, and then the environment plays a role as well. Because even though we want to go out, it takes a lot of energy to face the situation that we face outside, because it's not safe right now.
Right.
But the shift is happening, and that's the best part, because more people are taking stand for things, and that is bringing people out, and the shift is happening. So
That's right.
Yep.
Where a lot of people kind of go wrong is that they jump to the individual factors, where they want to tell people to go out and walk, or they want to tell people to eat healthy foods without making sure that that physical environment supports it. Where we would do awareness, and so that's an awareness campaign, like changing people's attitudes, perceptions, knowledge about a particular issue. So that's like raising awareness. But we could still use awareness campaigns, but use them as a way of engaging people in the physical environment changes that are needed.
Yeah.
And so if we can change that physical environment and we can get people pushing for those changes, that could be an awareness campaign saying, hey, did you know that this many women are assaulted on the streets every day? Or did you know that this many people are getting hit by cars at an intersection in this community? And then you can get people rallying behind that.
Yes.
It's one of these things where it's a necessary but not necessarily sufficient component. So what that means is the physical environment is necessary. It is necessary to have that support the physical activity. However, just because the physical environment supports physical activity doesn't mean that people will use it for that. But that then comes at the later stage. Then we can do other things to try and encourage people to go out and be active. There's been examples of physicians actually writing prescriptions for physical activity. So instead of writing a prescription for a diabetes medicine, they say, no, you need to go out and walk more. You need to walk 30 minutes every day. Here's your prescription. So there's other things that can happen once the physical environment is supportive, but we need that physical environment supportive first.
Yes, and that's where our responsibility as architect, urban designer, and planners lie. I really believe it.
Yeah.
So, yep. Okay, thank you so much for the detailed answer of it and the one things you said about Pakistan. That's true to some extent, but the shift is happening. That's also true.
Which is
So,
fantastic.
yep. Okay, so in order to make changes in the physical environment as well, we need community of leaders like who are ready to take change or to advocate for places. And in these areas, we need to raise some points. And what my main concern is always to know that what are actually the indicators of healthy communities for all age groups that we can start talking about in our cities or in our context, basically.
So, I mean, that could be like a whole semester of in university, right? As what are the healthy community indicators? I'm going to focus very narrowly on the specifics related to our what we work on in the Livable Cities program in HealthBridge. And because we're a Livable Cities program, and because I'm very much focused on the physical environment, I'm looking for things like the location and quality of all the public spaces. So where are the open public spaces like parks, playground, plazas? Where are the streets that have good walking environments? Where are the streets that have good physical or good cycling lanes? Where are the local public markets located where people can then access healthy, fresh food? So a lot of the indicators that we're looking at sort of at what I would call it an intermediate level would be those physical environment factors. And one of the things that I think is really important is to look for spatial equality. And what I mean, and you're an architect, so I'm sure this is going to resonate with you. One of the things that we have found when we've done situational assessment research in many of the communities that we're working in is that all of the parks are clustered in one area. And in some communities, all of the markets are clustered along the main road. They're not located in the neighborhoods, which means that there is a spatial inequality that exists within that city. So I'll use Kampala as an example because we did a mapping exercise where we mapped where were all of the formal public spaces. They're all in the center of the city. They're not in the periphery where the informal settlements are located. And so that creates a massive spatial inequality where people living in those informal settlements need to now travel, a long way in order to be able to access a formal public space. So a very basic indicator that I would be looking for would be those locations, an actual map where we can map where are the public spaces located. I like to draw either an 400 or 800 meter walking radius around those spaces because that's the 5 to 10 minute walk. And then we can identify really, really quickly where are the gaps within the community? Where are those places where people are living where they just don't have walkable access? So that would be kind of one high level indicator that we would be looking for. Then we also are looking for things like quality public spaces. Are the playgrounds broken? All of that. However, that then leads to what in our sort of terminology. So I use a logic model for our program where we have ultimate outcomes, intermediate outcomes, immediate outcomes, and then activities. The ultimate outcomes that we're actually looking to achieve are things like improved physical activity within a community. So if you have public spaces, and if you have lots and lots of public spaces within the community, the health outcome that we're looking for then is increased physical activity among the population. It could be that if we build it, they will come. So for kids, as long as their parents are letting them go outside, and that's a big if in the world that we're living in now, but if their parents are letting them go outside, they will go to the public spaces and they will play. We don't need to tell kids to play. They will play. Which means they're engaging in physical activity. The unstructured play is so important. And so from a health outcome perspective, once we achieve our intermediate outcomes where we've got lots of public spaces and there's spatial equality, we've got quality public spaces, people can walk and cycle to them easily, because what good is a park or a playground if there's a highway that separates it from the neighborhood and the kids can't actually walk there anyway? So as long as we can achieve those sorts of things, and we're actually seeing people use those public spaces, so that's another indicator. Are people using the spaces themselves? Because you can have a really great public space, or what's perceived to be a great public space by government officials, and nobody's using that space. Well, if nobody's using that space, then we're not going to see any changes within physical activity. So we want to kind of look for some of those sorts of things. But then on a livable cities perspective, we're looking for other things as well, because health can encompass everything, right? If you don't have gender equality, you can't be healthy. If you don't have livelihoods that allow you to, purchase the food and to live your life and have a, decent home, you're not going to be healthy. For climate change, if your community is experiencing a disaster every 6 months, you're not going to be healthy. So all of those SDGs, if you will, become the indicators of a healthy community, because that's what we need in order to be healthy. So it's a big question that you asked. So it depends on what level you wanted to actually think about, but I like to, because we're livable cities, I like to look at those intermediate factors or those intermediate outcomes. And then once we achieve those outcomes, then we can start to measure the higher level outcomes, which are things like physical activity, healthy eating, road safety, gender equality, violence in communities and public spaces. So we'd be looking to see, improved physical activity, reduction in violence, those sorts of things.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a general question, and I wanted to know that where do you personally start from? What is your starting point? And that's a good one because it's measurable. We can measure it up, and the social issues are definitely are related to these areas and can be measured up with time and with the with how we see the places and how we can measure it up. And I mean to say, that um it goes hand in hand. Like I have struggled between these two things separately and then collectively, and it depends on each other. That's what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah, and so it depends. So I was thinking of it holistically on a city level, like what are the indicators? But I'll answer it as a more of a programming answer. So one of the things to do when you are thinking about whether it's one public space, whether it's a collection of public spaces, or whether it's a citywide program, is to think about what are you trying to achieve? What is the outcome? What often happens when we're planning programs is we start with the activities. We say, this is what we want to do. And we don't think about what it is that we're trying to achieve. And when we think about what we're trying to do, what we end up doing is probably not achieving very much because we've just figured out the activities. So in our programming, in the HealthBridge programming, one of the things that we're looking at is, okay, what is it that we're actually trying to achieve here? So in this particular public space, if that was a public space project, what is the outcome that we're looking for in this space? And once we define that, then we figure out the activities. So I'm going to see if I can give you an example. So here's an example. If you have an active and safe routes to school program, so that's a program that's designed to help children get to school safely, to walk to school safely. If what you are trying to achieve is increased number of children walking to school, you may do these kinds of activities. Okay, so let's say you would do things like you would send messages to the parents to make sure that they know that the kids should be walking to school. Maybe you would set up things like walking school buses. But if you say to yourself, okay, we already have lots and lots of kids walking to school, but they're not walking to school safely, well, that changes the activities that you're going to do, right? So you're going to be more focused maybe on the physical environment to make sure that the intersections are dealt with. You're going to do studies, okay, where are the points at which kids are experiencing unsafe conditions? So it's a completely different set of activities. But usually what we do is we want to start with the activities first, right? And so then we're not really identifying what we want to achieve. So if you're working on a park project, you want to work with the community. What do you want? What do we want out of this park? What are the things that are important to us? Is it important to us that older people are able to use the park and have something to do here? Is it important that kids are able to use this park and space and have something to do? Is it important for women? And what is that? What does that look like? Or do we just want young men playing cricket in the public space, right? So those outcomes are very different. So if you just go in saying, okay, well, we're going to create a bunch of walking paths, but you haven't actually identified what you're trying to achieve from that walking path, then you might not actually get where you're going. So I'm not giving you the specifics about what the indicators are, because I do think it is very, especially when you're working on an individual park, it's going to be very site specific. But what I'm trying to get people to think about is plan the outcome first, or plan the objective first, and let the activities follow from that. Because if you start with the activities, you're probably not going to actually go where you need to go. It's like having a bicycle map, right? So the bicycle map is going to tell you your destination. You want to know if let's say you're going to bike to work or walk to work, you want to know that you've got the destination in mind. So you're going to figure out the route to actually get there, versus you just start walking and you end up wherever you walk. That's what happens when you plan with the activities first.
Great. And I can relate two things that I learned recently with you. And the second one I learned from the David English. And we were talking, and he was saying that when we are trying to create solutions, the creative solutions to a problem, we often forget that we have to first identify a problem that we need to deal with, the right problem, the right sort of problem, and then the solutions follow.
Yes.
So what I see in this is that we need to solve the problem of unhealthy lifestyle, and the solution is to activate public spaces. And the site specific, we find the right site, and then we ask that what do we want to achieve over here, and then we work on it, right? So this is the right kind of flow. I think we are going to get somewhere. I'm actually trying to, because I've recently started engaging the community in a neighborhood to achieve a safer community and a healthy community for their children. So I'm basically start asking people on how to do it, and this is actually helping me get the road to do it, and it's amazing. Thank you.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. Like identifying the problem that you're trying to solve is a critical first step, and making sure that that problem is an actual problem and not a perceived problem. Because this is the other thing that I encounter all the time. Someone will say, oh, well, this is a problem. And so, using the active and safe routes to school example, when we were working in Bangladesh, the perception was that all the children were being driven to school. If we had just assumed that that was the problem, because that's our perception, we would have gone down a completely different route. But when we did the study and we actually identified what is the actual problem, 90% of the children were already walking to school. The 10% of the children who were being driven to school were being driven distances of 8 kilometers or more. You're never going to shift those kids to walking, right? But if you didn't, so our perception was they were being driven, but that wasn't the reality. And so I'm just adding to make sure you're identifying the actual problem and not the perceived problem, not the problem that you perceive, or the community perceives, but actually ground it in an actual understanding of what's going on in that community.
Yes. It's actually important that that we identify the problem in the right manner. And he mentioned that almost 80% of your work in the first stage should be in identifying the right problem. And then we
Absolutely.
find solution, because it was so amazing that he said that in one place the problem actually was, after a lot of discussion, the problem was highlighted as that how to prevent people from falling off the ledge. And he said that only thing you could find was to build a fence on that place. Was there no solution, no other solution? And then people came up with planting trees and, creating a safe bed. And then the entire street look more aesthetically pleasing, and people were able to go to that area, enjoy from a distance, but they were safe as well as enjoying the place. So
Right.
it was a great example as well. Thank you. And okay, I also want to know that you have worked with different countries, and especially Asia, Africa, and South America. So what have been your experience there, and what were the challenges and opportunities that you see that we need to focus on as well?
Um, I think that we're all more similar than we think we are. And so the challenges across the world are, they may have a slightly different flavor, but the problems are essentially the same. So whether we're working in Asia or whether we're working in Africa, the challenge of the spatial inequality of the public spaces, we're seeing that almost everywhere. We're seeing, the challenge of corporate influence everywhere. And so what I mean by that is, we have lots and lots and lots of money in the transportation sector that is encouraging car use and not walking and cycling. They've shifted a little bit so that it's public transit, but again, like, public transit is an expensive solution. And it's important in order to move people from different neighborhood to different neighborhood, but we still need to really focus on that walking and cycling, but we don't have the same corporate influence related to that. Like, there's no corporations making money from you walking to work. And so the corporate influence, I think, is pervasive in every sort of country in terms of challenge, and how do we deal with that? And even in issues of just public spaces in general. So transportation is a really obvious one, but for markets, well, the corporate influence is supermarkets and the corporate food sector trying to sell their sugary, salty, fatty foods. So they have an influence. And then on public spaces like parks, well, we have local developers who would way rather take that park and put up a building on it and make money off of that than maintaining it as a park. So I would say that is a challenge that we're seeing across the different countries. In terms of the opportunities, I have found, and this may be unique to HealthBridge, but we do work in some capital cities, but we also work in a lot of secondary cities. And I really feel like the secondary cities provide us with an amazing opportunity to actually fix some of the problems that we have. So these are cities that are smaller in nature, and depending on the country, smaller might not really be small. Like, I think in India, secondary cities can be millions of people. But they are also cities that are often forgotten by a lot of the big international development agencies. So, you will see, in the case of India, you'll see lots of organizations in Delhi, Mumbai, Calcutta, but you don't see them in the smaller cities. And what that means is that for our partners, then they have an opportunity to influence their government process, because they're often the only people talking to their government officials about these issues. And so they can present themselves as the experts because they are the experts, but they're also listened to as the experts. The other thing that I find good about secondary cities is that often, it's not always the case, but often the people who live and work in the city were born in that city. They've lived in that city their whole life, and that's the city they're going to die in. So they have more of an investment personal investment in the city and to have the city function really well, versus some of the capital cities where you're pulling people from all over the place and they might not feel the sense of place that comes with staying in a place for your whole life. So I see secondary cities as being a real opportunity. I think having the sustainable development goals set out the way they were also provides a real opportunity. So public spaces, although there is a public spaces target, we have been able to successfully talk to governments and illustrate how public spaces help them achieve multiple sustainable development goals, right? So if you work on public spaces, so it's basically working on public spaces is a best buy. If you work on public spaces, you're going to improve public health, you're going to improve potentially livelihoods because that's where all the informal workers work. You're potentially going to improve gender equality. You're going to do and make things better for climate action. So by working in this one area, you actually can hit a number of targets for the SDGs. And that's really important because there's so many, right? 169 targets is really hard for governments to tackle all at once. So if you can convince them that by doing this one action, you can hit a whole bunch, I think that lends itself to being a real. And I think just people in general, for me, the messaging around children is really important, and everybody loves their children, right? It's really hard to argue that children shouldn't have a safe place to play. It's really hard to argue that children shouldn't be able to safely walk to school or that they shouldn't be able to eat healthy food. You're not a good person if you stand up in a meeting and say, no, I don't think children should be able to play safely. So I think there's real opportunities to illustrate why this is so important for children. And if it's good for children, it's going to be good for everyone else, including seniors as well. So I would say those would be some of the areas where I think there's major opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much for highlighting all these things, and I've learned a lot, and I have also realized few areas that I should work on, and that will be best supporting areas during my advocating for a lot of things. So thank you so much for the insights and for sharing your wisdom with me and for the audience. Okay, so these were the questions that were particularly for you, and now I'm going to ask you a few questions which I ask everyone. It's sort of rapid fire and just to know you personally. Okay, I want to know that what drives you, what keeps you focused on the work that you do.
I love the people that I work with. So the organizations that we work with and the people who are connected to those organizations, they inspire me every day. So I am not the one that does the hard work. I am the one that gets to chat with lovely people like you. They're the ones that do all of the hard work, and I just find them so inspirational that there's lots of people who have what they call Monday blues. I never have the Monday blues. I'm always excited to get to my desk and see what wonderful things the partners have done. So I would say that's what keeps me motivated for sure.
Wow, and your excitement was something that was inspiring me, and I was looking forward to the talk as well. And now I get it why. Okay, what would you like to share any proudest moment of your work life?
Proudest moment. That's a tricky one. And it's a tricky one because I'm so proud of the partner's success. So the two examples that I gave you, there's examples like that across all of our partnership. But it's not my success, if that makes sense. It's their success. I've supported it, but they're the ones that have succeeded. So you know what? Maybe I think it's the fact that we have managed to maintain such strong relationships with our partners so I started in 2010. So since 2010, we really maintained those strong partnerships. People feel like family. So I feel proud that we've created that kind of environment where we can all come together and work together. And it feels like I'm working with my family and not just colleagues, but family. So I think that's what I'm most proud about.
That's lovely, and it's very generous of you to, celebrate and to be happy about someone else's success, and and not taking it just your own success, but as a collective success. It takes
Yeah.
a lot of courage and humbleness to actually admit it. Very nice. Okay, any hardest moment of your work life that you would like to share, and how was the struggle about it and the lesson that came out of it?
The hardest stuff. That one's tricky. The only thing that immediately popped into mind was a very recent example. There's probably better ones, but this is the one that pops into mind. So we have a local partner that experienced a coup, where it really disrupted everything. So to the point where we couldn't actually, so the government was overthrown by a military, and we weren't even able to transfer any funds to the partner to continue with the program, because there was an embargo on all funding. And so I found that really challenging and stressful, because I know how much great work this partner is doing, and to not be able to continue to support that great work, I found that a real struggle. There's no real way to prevent that. We have no way of preventing a coup. So what we did was we just continued to provide moral support, regular emails, staying in touch, making sure he continues to be okay. But there are instabilities everywhere with the partners. There was actually a major flood in Kerala. Our partners lost their homes there. Like so these types of the earthquake in Nepal, like all of these major events also impact people, right? So we know about them broadly. Like Pakistan had a massive flood. Was it 2 years ago? So that probably impacted you personally, in addition to it being the whole country. But because we're so connected with the partners, we're seeing the personal part to that. Not being able to help in any substantive way is always a struggle. So I would say that's the most challenging, as to how to help the partners through that.
And it's very humbling to me that how you are very invested in the people and your relationships with other people. You like your proudest moment is also about people, and they're not your family, but they are your colleagues, or let's say the partners, but you treat them as family. And your hardest moment is also about not being able to support them. That's
Yeah.
truly humbling. Okay, do you have any placemaking mantra or any favorite quote that you remember around your work?
Favorite quote. Oh, that one I might have to think about a little. So I have like a personal mantra. It's not necessarily a public space mantra. So there's two. One came from Deborah, and she maybe shared this one with you too. It's either a good time or a good story. And that's been so helpful in all of our work, so that it's really important that we give ourselves an opportunity to fail. I think if we're not failing sometimes, then we're not being innovative, and we're not really testing boundaries. And so we need to celebrate and share when we fail. And so from my work perspective, like not everything works out, but it's going to be a good story if it doesn't work out. So you're either having a good time or you're having a good story. But then the other sort of personal mantra I have is feel the fear and do it anyway. So even when something is challenging, or you feel really uncomfortable about it, you can feel that fear, but you still have to keep moving forward. So those would be the two that I like.
Lovely. And this is mine as well. I have written on my diary, which is if you can be scared, but you do it even if you're scared. And I have that same as well. And yes, Ma'am Deborah shared it with me that enjoy. You have to
Yeah.
have fun. You can't miss it. So, yep. Do you have any opinion about Pakistan, or do you know something about Pakistan, or would you like to know about it? I would like to know
Yeah,
that.
I'm always interested in different countries and cultures. We don't actually have a project in Pakistan. I know a little bit about it from the flood a few years ago, because that was such a catastrophic event, and it was so devastating to the whole country. So I would absolutely love for you to share with me, via email or however, more information about Pakistan and what you're doing, because we've talked a lot about me today, but we haven't talked a whole lot about what you're doing. And so I'd love to hear more about that.
Definitely, I'll keep in touch and I'll update you as well. And
Great.
I have more to learn from you, so we'll stay. We'll share that.
Well, learn from each other, right? Like it's an opportunity to learn from each other because sorry, the partners have lots of great successes, but they're always looking for new ideas. So
Thank you so much for being open to it and for showing interest in this. Okay, so lastly, do you have any advice for the young professional that are joining in?
yeah, I think feel the fear and do it anyway, I think is a really good one. Because especially when you're starting out new, it can be really challenging and it can be scary to start something new. So I think feel that fear and keep moving forward. And I think you've used this word a few times in relation to me, but I also think it's important for everyone, and that's to be humble. So we aren't the experts in the particular community. We may have our own personal expertise. So my expertise is public health. Your expertise is architecture. Their expertise may be something else. But the community has a lot of expertise about what works and how their community functions. And so we need to go in not as experts, but as humble people to listen to what is happening, and to really support the capacity that is already there. So a lot of the time we use the terms, we're going to increase the capacity of so-and-so, but a lot of time it's not about increasing capacity, it's just supporting the capacity that already exists. So I think if we look at it from a humble perspective, and that we have a perspective, but so do lots of other people, and it's just as valuable, I think that will go a long way to help make our world a much better place. So
Great advice. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was such a wholesome conversation, and I learned a lot from you, and I look forward to learning more from you in future as well. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll stay in touch.
excellent. Thank you. Well, it was so nice to chat with you.
Same here. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.